Welcome to Global Insights, and I am very glad to host one of most prominent Israel speakers and scholars, Dr. Tomer Persico from Shalom Hartman Institute.
Thank
Tomer,
you, Alex.
Welcome. It's always, for me, excitement to see you.
Thank you very much.
And we would like to discuss today the one thing which I cannot understand. Why people who belong to radical left or to left part of the society and share many values with the values which I believe in, like personal freedom, respect for human rights, respect for women, and etc., 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 they tend today to support and very warmly a radical Islamist ideology, which is opposite to all these values.
So let's make a few distinctions. First of all, we're talking about anti-Semitism, if there is, from the left and not the right. Of course, there is much anti-Semitism on the extreme right, sometimes very violent. We're not talking about that. We're also not talking about most of the left, and even most of the protesters today in campuses across the USA. Most of them are fighting for the rights of a people that is oppressed, and or to end the war. That's something else. On the fringes of that, we see people who actively support Hamas and actively support a global intifada and root for violence and as a form of resistance, even rape as a form of resistance. So that's the people we're talking about, again, who most of which I don't even know if they actually understand what they're saying, understand who Hamas is, etc. But there are those who do. And there are those, even if we look at the past, prominent radical left thinkers that supported fundamentalist Islamic movements. The most classic example is Michel Foucault, who in 78, 79 was in Tehran rooting the humanistic revolution and talking about how Islam, how Shiite fundamentalism will build a new spiritual politics which will then spread across the world, etc. You've got Baudrillard, who made excuses for how the 9/11 terrorist attacks, how the terrorism was directed to disrupt the global commerce, the global commerce system, etc. And so you've got recently Judith Butler, who looks at Hamas and what Hamas did on the 7th of October and says that we have to emphasize that this is not terrorism but armed resistance, right? It's very important to her.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah. So when we look at that pattern in the radical left, being enthusiastic about fundamentalist Islam, we have to ask ourselves, what's happening here? Like you said, this is totally opposite of basic humanistic liberal values. What's happening here? And what I think is happening here is a few things. First of all, an accentuation of post-colonialist thought that sees colonialism as the worst atrocity, the worst sin, which has to be resisted by any means. Okay, and so legitimizes terrorism, etc. We see identity politics that takes the weak side as the right side, that takes the subjugated people as always legitimate in everything they do. And I think what is most important to notice here is that we see an anti-West sentiment, what we might call Occidentalism, by way of taking off of Edward Said's Orientalism book. So Occidentalism is painting the West as evil, painting the West as problematic, as imperialist, as colonialist, etc. Even painting the Enlightenment and liberal values as a form of colonialism, a form of Western hegemony or attempt at hegemony, an attempt at subjugation of non-Western societies. Now, what we need to notice is that anti-Westernism or Occidentalism is nothing new. Thinkers from France thought that the British were too Western and liberal and individualistic. Thinkers from Germany thought that about France and Britain. Thinkers from Russia thought that about the whole of Europe that is west of Russia. Thinkers from China and Japan thought about the whole of the West. And today you hear that sentiment against the United States as, again, and always the West here is depicted as decrepit, decadent, too individualistic, too spoiled, rotten at its core, etc. That's really the sentiment. And I think this feeds in to these radical left thinkers and their criticism on the West, and makes the West into, again, the worst regime or society ever. Foucault has this line when he talks about the left in Tehran. He says the West is the most subjugating and violent form of politics ever. Okay, so that is why this stance is being built up, being established, and now put Israel into that equation. And Israel today is taken to be a Western outpost in the middle of the East, a sort of Western coat of arms stuck within an Oriental arabesque, right? And that in itself is, of course, an atrocity, a sin. How can Western people, impose themselves on Eastern? How can white people, Jews are suddenly white, of course, right? This is
which will never have been.
Yeah, this is an incredible historical irony, how Jews became white, and even white supremacists.
White supremacists,
right? Yeah. So now Jews as whites are imposing themselves on non-whites. So in itself, it's of course, a catastrophe. And Israel is, of course, occupying the Palestinian people for the last 57 years. Israel is now waging war, which is, horrendous in many different ways. And so that, all that criticism of all that anti-Western sentiment gets directed and pointed at Israel. And the wish to basically to eliminate Israel, to erase Israel off the map, is the wish to erase Western colonialism, Western oppression, Western imperialism from history. And even, I would say, eliminate Westernness from those protesting, from those in the radical left that are ashamed of their Westernness.
I have here a question. These slogans like from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, they're basically saying that Israel has no right to exist. And I'm asking you, even if you think, or someone thinks that we are not always right and we do some wrong things, or we are waging not the right, war not in the right way, I can accept the criticism. Yeah. But no one is saying Russia has no right to exist because it waged a war on Ukraine.
Yeah, exactly.
Why only in case of Israel someone is claiming that we have no right to exist?
That's the thing. I think here again, Israel is grasped, is conceptualized as the epitome of Western dominance in the East, as the most racist, white supremacist example of nationalism, imposing itself on non-Westerns, etc. And that's why Israel as if has to be eliminated. And indeed, you do not hear those calls against any other country, no matter what crimes it does. And here this turns, I think, into anti-Semitism. The anti-Semitism here is depicting the Jews or understanding the Jews as being the most sinful, the most corrupt, the most vicious, the most malicious people and country in the world, right? It's just, Israel has become this demon in their eyes that cannot be forgiven, right? And indeed, this demon must be slayed and this country must be eliminated in order for us to be redeemed, to be redeemed, or in order for the world to be redeemed. And they even talk that way. When Israel is eliminated, the whole capitalist order will collapse. You hear these things, and of course, capitalism also is the most evil and thing in the world. So here, anti-Semitism is directed towards Israel, towards the Jews. And what's new about this anti-Semitism is that this time the Jews are not conceived as a foreign element trying to invade the West, as a pariah people, as a subhuman race, contaminating the folk, the nation, the pure race, etc. But Israel is depicted as the West itself, as the roots of the West, because here Judaism and monotheism and Jewish nationalism is considered the Ur-Westerner, Western essence, because it's monotheism, it's the first nation that viewed itself as chosen, perhaps, right? It's again, and so Judaism is resisted here, and Israel is resisted here as the roots of the West, which must be uprooted in order for us to be cleansed of any Westernness that is in us.
We're all familiar with the old anti-Semitism, where Jews always represented the evil. It doesn't matter what kind of evil. Yeah, we could be the people who killed the Christ, or in the beginning of 20th century in the Russian Empire, people said if you remove any revolutionary poster, you will find a Jews behind the poster. What currently sparked this anti-Semitism, which is based partly on history?
No, so I think the point is the difference between this old anti-Semitism and the new anti-Semitism. I think the old anti-Semitism really, as we said, viewed Jews as a foreigner trying to invade, and the new anti-Semitism views Jews as the most Western element and thus has to be eradicated. But this is also pointing to an element in which Jews are modern. This is the switch in this anti-Semitism from old to new has to do with a switch from older times to modern times. And here, I think the anti-Western sentiment I talked about before is at the very base also an anti-modern sentiment. There is a problem for thinkers like Foucault and others with modernity. Perhaps that's why they are postmodern, right? There is a problem with individualism, autonomy, the move from Gemeinschaft to Gesellschaft, from community to society. This, I think, is a challenge to all of us. Existentialism as a philosophy deals with that challenge, and I would even say that grand theories like communism and fascism deal with that challenge. And I think this is also a way to understand and resist modernity. Modernity is a corrupt and failing shift from traditional society to individualism, which is decadent and rotten. And the resistance to Israel and Judaism is also a resistance to elements of modernity that are here coming to that are representing perhaps values of modernity that should be resisted.
Modernity is also built on the national states, on the nationalism.
Yeah.
Which that was the 19th century. The central thing is the rise of the nationalism, right. National states. And today, in the postmodern times, actually they think that the time of the national state is over, and we are currently should be in globalism in this or another way, but in the global society.
I think even when they talk about global society, they will talk about some sort of shift that has to occur within human consciousness or human relationships, in which we cease to be alienated or anomic individuals and become, living in solidarity and brotherhood and fraternity, etc. And I think this, again, it shows that what they are troubled about at the very base is this autonomous individualism that I think is challenging every society. And again, when when Foucault roots for the humanistic revolution in Iran, he talks about Iranian people pushing off modernity. They don't want to be modern. I think we should listen to that. I think there is something telling here about what is really disturbing for these thinkers from the radical left. And Israel is just in the way here.
We are the national state of Jewish people, which is declared openly. And maybe as the last question, what message would you like to convey for those people who stand now and demonstrate against Israel, who are trying not to allow Jewish students to enter the campuses?
You know, I don't think I really have something very, anything significant to tell them. I don't think they are listening, and I don't think I can convince them. What I'm worried about more is the liberal and humanistic left-wingers and right-wingers who I want to keep as allies of Israel. And here I have criticism of my own of Israel that is not moving in the right direction to keep those people as allies. So that's what's troubling me.
Dr. Tomer Persico, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Stay tuned for more on Global Insights, and thank you again.
Achla. Thank you.